my kitchen, and I'm so excited today to welcome my friend Lovella Schellenberg. Hi, Lovella.
Hi, Charlotte.
Welcome here.
Thank you.
And you may recognize the name. Lovella was the person who got a group of ladies together and started the very well-known Mennonite Girls Can Cook blog about 12 years ago. And all the recipes are still on your website, right? Even though they're not adding new ones. And there are lots and lots of great recipes on there. So make sure you take a look at that. It's not just Mennonite foods, but that is how it started.
That's right.
Yeah. But there's lots of really great everyday recipes. So, you know the saying, easy as pie? Well, actually, I don't like that saying because pie making isn't actually all that easy if you have never done it before. And I have struggled with it because, like a lot of people, I followed the recipe on the box, the tender flake box, and it was always dry, and I was scared I was putting too much gluten in it or handling it too much, and it would be tough. So when we started the market and we started carrying the Crust Farms pastry patties, I totally gave up because this is so much easier than trying to make my own. However, last year, Lovella, who is a very, very fantastic baker and cook, did a little Instagram video of her making pie in her kitchen. And I made the recipe myself, and it was revolutionary. It totally changed for me, and it has actually become much, much easier than pie. We're getting close to the same. So today we are going to show you how to make pie crusts using tender flake lard, and then we are also going to show you how to make a peach pie after that. So let's get going.
All right.
So the recipe that we're using is in the Mennonite Girls Can Cook second book called Celebrations, and it varies a little bit from the back of the box of tender flakes. So before we get going, Lovella, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. So I grew up with pie, and it was either Crisco that people were using or tender flake, and you obviously prefer tender flake lard.
I do.
Why is that?
I like tender flake because it's a natural animal product.
Yeah, this is a hydrogenated fat, and this is a natural animal product. So I agree. I think it makes a great pie crust. Now, a lot of people use butter. I see lots of recipes with that. I personally don't like it either, but why do you not like using butter?
I think that butter could tend to make the pastry tough. And so if you're going to use butter, butter is still good for the flavor. But then just use half. I would not more than half. Yeah.
Half lard, half butter.
Yeah. And then use unsalted because unsalted has less moisture in their product.
In their product.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other things that vary a little bit from the recipe on the tender flake is you use baking powder, which does what?
Baking powder just helps to lighten up the crust a little bit. It'll puff up slightly, but not enough to be like a cake. But it'll just give it a little bit more lightness.
Okay, and you also add a little bit of brown sugar.
Yes, and that just helps with the browning and gives it just that little pinch of sweetness. You won't notice it, but it does help to brown the crust.
Okay, so even if you're doing a savory, like a quiche, you could still use this recipe. It won't taste sweet. And then the other things that go into the pie crust besides your fat and your flour is an egg. What does the egg do?
The egg adds protein. It also adds helps in the coloring of the pastry when it's baked.
Okay, and then vinegar.
Vinegar is an acid, so it's going to help to keep the gluten from forming.
Okay, this is not like a bread. You don't want gluten.
Right.
It's the opposite of bread. So water, egg, and vinegar, and you can use like apple cider vinegar or
any kind of vinegar, as long as it's a white vinegar.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do a dark, not a balsamic.
Not a balsamic. Okay. All right. Well, we are going to get going, and I'm going to let Lovella take over and show you how she makes her pie crust.
So in my bowl, I've already added 5 cups of flour.
Okay, now I'm going to stop you because the back of the box says 6 cups of flour. So why have you cut it down? And it's all-purpose flour,
So if you're going to use pastry flour, you could do 6 cups. All-purpose flour, the box says 5.5 cups.
Okay.
But
you've cut it back.
I've cut it back to 5 because I find it so much easier to work with. I got this recipe from my friend Dorothy many years ago, and I have not wavered from her recipe since. I always say the best pie crust is a pie crust that all your friends have had input in.
Right.
Just gather everybody's tricks, right?
Yeah.
So it's got 5 cups of flour, and in the end, when you're rolling out your pie, you don't have to be afraid of adding too much flour.
Right.
So you've got half a cup to play with then at the end, and you're not going to have to worry about making it too tough by by using the flour you're rolling up with.
Yeah.
So I've got,
Which is, I think, why I gave up making pie, because I followed the box and it always ended up dry.
right,
Yeah. So
and it starts to crack and everything else, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, so into here I've already added my 4 teaspoons of brown sugar, and the brown sugar is just to give it that little bit of brownness. So I've got my 5 cups of flour here, and you might wonder what is the best tool to use when you're making pastry. You can use one of these. It's called a pastry cutter, and it's kind of a handy gizmo, and you can get your extra lard off of there. Or you can do, if your lard is really cold, using a grater works really well. You just
like frozen, you can even
freeze it, and then use this grater box, and just every once in a while you grate some and just sort of stir it together like that. But you know what? The tool we've all been given is our hands.
Yep.
And so what I do is I just take my pound of lard and I cut it into little cubes like this, and just kind of get the flour, get the big cubes mixed in with flour. First, just gently toss it together like that. And then you're just going to start gently rubbing the flour and the lard together like that. And doing that, always adding more flour, is giving you already those layers.
So they always talk about not doing too much with your pie dough, right? Because you don't want it to get tough.
right.
But the gluten doesn't develop really
No,
until
that's
you add
right.
the liquid. So
Yeah.
you can work this as much as you want, and
Sure.
you're not going to end up with a tough pie
You're
crust.
going to do this until it looks a little bit like oatmeal. You're going to have a few bigger pieces left, and some pieces is just going to be rubbed right in there. And you just
And you
keep
can wear
going.
gloves too if you don't want to get all that stuff under your
if
fingernails.
you don't want, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you've got your hands nice and clean and you don't mind giving them a wash at the end, just go for it.
Okay.
And you can see, right? You can see how the pieces are already like flaky.
Yeah.
So that's what you're developing. You're developing the flake in there.
And it just kind of makes layers in there.
It does,
And
yeah,
that's what
absolutely.
gives you your flaky pie crust.
Yeah, and the other thing is that when you're touching it with your hands, you have a very good sense of where it's at. You're not going to miss any big clumps. And it really only takes a minute, maybe 2, to do this part.
So Lovella, we got so excited about making the pie dough that we forgot to add the salt and the baking powder, which ideally should have gone in at the beginning, but it's actually okay.
Yeah,
You can
and
still
that
add
is
it in.
something a pro would do.
Yeah.
They would have done that right away, but you know what? It's okay.
Well, we're just 2 little old ladies making pie
We
together.
are having such a good time. Okay, so just give that a toss then.
Yeah.
It'll be totally fine.
Yeah. That looks great. And you've been going about 2 minutes or
Yeah.
so it's a good way to get your frustrations out.
It is.
And you know what? If you're a short person, you could actually put this right in your sink.
Oh,
and then
yes.
it's a little bit lower.
Yeah.
Or
I
if you have
actually,
shoulder issues.
I do that a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we're at that stage now. So we have not overmixed anything. We're ready to go, and now you
Okay.
can add the liquids. So we're going to continue on now with adding the liquid. We're finished with rubbing in all the lard. And just so that you know, the recipe will be on our website. You don't need to be making notes here. We'll put a link to the recipe on our website. Okay, Lovella?
Okay, so I've already got my liquid mixed together. I started with 1 egg and a tablespoon of vinegar, and I used a fork and beat that up a little bit, and then I added water up to 1 cup. But don't add it all at one time. You can start just by drizzling it in and just continuing to stir with your fork. Try to get to the bottom, mix in all the little bits. And I would stop adding liquid when you've got about a 1/4 cup of liquid left. And then just see how that is, because again, we talked about humidity and stuff like that. And it is a bit of a warmer day, so that makes a difference too.
So how do you know when you've got enough liquid in there? What are you looking for?
Really when it's starting to clump together.
Okay.
And I'm seeing it's clumping together pretty good already. And that could be due to the fact that the lard was not really chilled. So let's have a see here. So then just take it like this. If it forms into a ball like that, you're good.
Okay.
You don't need to keep adding more liquid.
And you're still seeing pieces of the lard in
Yeah,
there, right?
you can
Like
still see the pieces
yeah.
of the lard, which is great because then once you start rolling it out, you're already rolling it onto flour, which is going to take those bigger pieces of lard and just make that into a little pocket of lard to make the flakiness.
Okay.
Okay, now we're ready to make it into balls. Just sort of divide them up. If I always sort of say, how much do you need to roll out a pie crust? For me, of course, it's my hand, but I always feel like when I've got enough to kind of make a handful like that, that will be enough for doing a crust.
So when I made it, just to, I did weigh and I weighed everything just so that we could tell people. So it works out to about 10 ounces per ball. And again, we'll have that all written down in our website.
And
Recipe.
even now already you can use a little bit of flour to make these balls. If you find your pastry is a little bit sticky, just grab a little bit of flour, put them together. And so how many balls did you get then, Charlotte?
I did 5.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I would rather have more pastry than not
Yeah,
enough, because I don't do a perfect circle when I roll it out.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have to
Exactly.
be patching and doing all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So
that's exactly right.
is that what you usually do?
Yeah,
5?
I do 5 as well.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, at this point, what would you recommend? Because I think you can freeze the pie dough as well, too,
Sure.
right?
When I make pie dough, I never make enough for just one pie. I always make, for sure, a batch like this, and sometimes I do another batch right after, because then you can just take it and flatten them like this and wrap them into some plastic wrap, and then put them in a Ziploc bag, and they will stay like this like up to a year.
Yeah.
There is no concern about them being...
And it doesn't take long to thaw.
No, they thaw very quickly, and the only thing is, what I always say is, if they are still quite cold, don't try to roll them out and force them when it's still quite cold. It's always better just to do this a little bit.
Oh yeah, flatten them a
And
little
just flatten them, and it won't crack the dough, and it just makes it a little easier to start the rolling out process. So again,
You can freeze them at this point, just like that.
Yes.
Flatten them into a little circle, like Lovella showed you, a little patty, something like
Yeah.
that. And now you're going to show us how you roll it out. So it seems like it really helps to have it started in a circle shape
yes,
already,
it
right?
does. And I just use my hand to kind of cup it like this, and think of it more like the outside is staying a little bit bigger, and you're just using this part of your hand,
The heel of your hand.
to do that. You're going to need a bench scraper. I don't know what I'd do without my bench scraper, because this allows you to just constantly move the pastry. You don't want it to stay in one. You're not going to roll it out in one spot without moving it. That will...
It'll stick to the counter.
You could possibly have a very, stuck on. So you just always keep turning it. If you find that it's starting to stick a little bit, just go ahead, or you see a little bit of lard coming through where you might have had a bigger clump, just keep stirring it. Oh, there it's sticking a little bit, so you just take your bench scraper and put a little bit more flour down and just keep going.
And just
At this point, you want to make sure with every roll that it hasn't been sticking on the bottom, because that's when it gets a little bit trickier.
So while you're rolling that out, let's talk for a minute about the different kinds of pie plates that you can use. So
Okay.
I see you've got a glass one there. What is that your preference?
I like to use a glass one most often, just because you can see how the bottom of the crust is browning. It's kind of like a free guess.
Yeah.
But I use that. I use Corningware. The only ones that I probably would not ever bake a pie in is aluminum. So if you've ever gotten a pie, a ready-made frozen pie that you just have to bake, even those if I've had a pie shell or something, I will take it completely frozen and just put it into another same size,
Mm-hmm.
permanent, if you want to say it that
Yeah.
way, pan.
Yeah.
It'll just bake better. Foil just reflects the heat. You're not going to get a nice colored crust.
Okay, so it looks like you've almost got a circle. How do you know when it's big enough?
Let's see. It's not.
Yeah, that's what I do too. I should flip it over on
Yeah.
upside down. So
You want it to be thin. You don't want to have a nice, you don't want it to be a thick crust.
Yeah.
Because it is going to, you know, when you're putting those edges together, it's already going to develop some thickness there. So
Yeah.
let's see. That looks pretty good, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're just going to take it with your,
Another great
Roll it
trick.
up.
Roll it up on your.
and this
roll
is
it
where
down.
you get rid of a little extra flour if you have some. Just make sure it's not sticking on the bottom with your bench scraper. You can see there's a little bit of sticking there. And then I take it and I put the side down that was on top.
Oh, okay.
Because that will have more flour than the less flour.
And it's not tearing. It's really
It's
holding
very
together.
tender.
Yeah, it's really holding together well.
And then you just want to ease it in. Give yourself overhang around all the edges.
And you're just lightly pressing it
Just
in.
lightly pressing it. You don't have to press it hard. You just want to make sure, use your finger to make sure it's gotten into the bottom edge there.
Now, something that happens to me often is that I will end up with not enough pie dough right here, and then I'll have way too much there. 'Cause
Yeah.
I didn't get a perfect circle.
Yeah.
So how do you fix that?
Well, I typically use a knife and take the most part where it's excess.
Yeah. So we're patching.
And
It's
you're
okay to
just
patch.
patching. Yeah, it's totally fine to patch. It's not a problem at all. Because all that's going to be covered. You just don't want to have a big gaping hole where and here I can see that there's a little bit extra lard there. That's more, a little extra patch, so I'm just going to do that there. All right,
Okay.
now we're ready to make the filling.
Okay. Lovella is going to show us 2 ways that you can use all this dough that you have made.
Right, so the first way is to freeze it in patties with your plastic wrap. The other thing that I do, and this is what I most often do, is I get my pie shells already for doing blind baking for lemon meringue or cream pies, fresh strawberry pie this time of year. And I just find it is just the slickest thing to make a batch of this pastry and then put it into, you can use foil pans, but I found these rather inexpensive dark pans. And so I just bought myself a bunch of them. And then you're just going to press foil down in it, like that. And then you'll put your next one on top. And you just have a layer of them. And you can, you know, trim off that excess probably before you put that on top. But then you have a whole stack of them, and again, this is something, because they're sort of sealed between the things, they'll stay good. I put them in a really big Ziploc bag, and they'll stay like that for months.
Yeah. And you can use Lovella has these handy dandy little pre-cut foil sheets, but you can just use regular tin foil.
Right.
And it doesn't matter whether it's shiny side up or shiny side down. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're going to be using this pie shell for a pie, like a fresh strawberry pie or a lemon meringue or something where you want the pie crust baked beforehand, you do something called blind baking. So you're baking the pie crust first. So what I do is I have 2 different kinds of pie weights, because what happens is the pie crust puffs up and it shrinks, and then you end up with just this tiny little thing. So I always poke mine all over with a fork, and then I lay a little bit of wax paper down, and I put these pie weights in there, and that just keeps it from shrinking. You can use that is one kind. There's like a continuous bead thing. Or I also have these, and these are just like a little, I don't even know what they're made out of, but all you're doing is creating weight. And you can even use like dry beans or rice, uncooked rice for that. But Lovella, I just noticed that you do yours differently than that. So let's get mine out
I
of
always
here.
find that it's just enough for me if I just take the foil and kind of tuck it under like this. And just the fact that it's pressed into the sides, I don't have to add anything else to that. I find
Yeah.
it works just great. And then once it has set, like I let it bake like this for about 10 minutes.
At what temperature?
At 375, 400.
Okay.
What do you do yours at?
Yep, about
Yeah.
that. Yep.
And then once it's set, I kind of look, just take a peek, and then once it's set, I take this off, and then I just brown it. It's not going to brown if you've got the foil on there.
Yeah. So how much longer?
Maybe 10 minutes. It's one of those things where you just kind of have to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't broil it or anything.
No,
You
no.
continue baking
Yeah.
it at the same temperature.
Yes,
so
exactly.
about a total of 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And some surfaces, like depending on if you use glass or
Yes.
this, they bake at different times. So you just have to kind of watch
I'm always
it.
hesitant to say because every pie pan and every oven is a little different.
Yeah, so approximately 20 minutes, so half of the time with just the tin foil, take it out, and then the rest of the time, just, bake it without the tin foil. So you ended up with a little bit of extra pie dough when you were cutting around the sides. What do you do with this stuff?
So I typically just do all my pies first, keep all my scraps at the end, and then at the very end I make one shell, and it's just for the family. It's not going to be the most tender, it's not going to be the most flaky, but it's going to hold the filling.
Yeah,
And nobody complains.
No, I'm sure they don't. If you get a piece of fresh pie, okay.
None of it has to be thrown out.
Yeah, okay. We are now going to go on to make a peach pie, a baked peach pie, a double crust peach pie. And so the peaches that Lovella is using are early Red Haven peaches. They're not considered a freestone, they're a semi-freestone, but look at, once they're ripe, they just peel really, really easily. And I mean, you could boil the water and blanch them and do all of that, but you're not making a lot. You're using about, you said about eight?
I used about nine peaches
for
actually.
a 9-inch pie
And
shell?
they're just gonna come off that.
Yeah.
So easy.
It's going in a pie shell, so it doesn't have to be perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
No. I find that if I just slice it into four like that, the peel will come off so nicely.
It just smells so good in here
It
already,
does.
even without anything baking.
Oh,
There's just nothing better than
fresh
fresh summer peach.
My mouth is watering so much. Look at the juice on that.
And you want to catch all that juice, right?
Yeah,
That's all
you
going
sure
into,
do.
into the pie.
Take up that.
Yeah. How many peaches did you have in here?
It was 7.
About 7, so we're looking for about 6 cups,
Right.
approximately. Okay, let's continue on with the filling. And the nice thing about peaches is they're already quite sweet, right? So you don't
absolutely.
need a lot
Yeah.
of sugar in there.
So we're gonna start with half a cup of sugar. And I'm doing 2 tablespoons of flour. And there's 2 tablespoons of tapioca in here.
So what's tapioca?
Tapioca is, what is it? It was hard to find during COVID, I know that.
Okay, so it's just a different type of starch.
Yeah,
If they don't have, why tapioca?
it gives it a really nice gel effect in there. Like flour and cornstarch and tapioca all do different things. And my mom just always used tapioca. Minute tapioca, it's the very fine,
I don't have a package to show you, but you can find it in the Asian food section.
Right, and you can also use tapioca starch, right? That's what this is.
Because the bag is so funny, I put it in my own jar.
Okay,
But
yeah.
I do the same thing.
Right.
Because it makes a nice clear gel.
That's right. So you're gonna stir that together. Get it all,
And if you didn't have tapioca, you could just substitute it all with flour, right?
yeah, or some cornstarch.
Yeah. They're
It's
all
all good.
thickeners and they can be used interchangeably. They just all have different qualities.
Yeah. Now, what I would say is you don't want to mix up this peach pie filling before you start making your pastry. Because as you can see, as soon as you add that sugar,
Yeah.
look at what happens. The juices just start to flow. You're going to get more and more juice.
Which
So,
is yummy.
into it, you just want a little bit of, to balance out the sugar,
A little acid.
you want a little bit of acid. So I like to use a lemon. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen this trick before.
I have never seen this.
This is awesome. When the recipe says you need a squeeze of lemon,
Yeah.
you just stick a skewer in there like that. And
Oh my goodness.
look at that. It works beautifully.
And you're getting a little workout while
Yeah,
you're...
that's right. You don't have to worry about your seeds that way, right?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it works really well.
So is that like about a juice of 1 whole lemon?
No, it's
like-
a squeeze.
Yeah, a squeeze.
I don't know.
A
When it's-
tablespoon probably.
A tablespoon probably, yeah.
Yeah, that
Okay.
is so juicy.
So
already.
juicy. Okay, so now we have to roll out our second topper. Just do our top crust, get that all ready. Put your flour down. Use the heel of your hand to a little bit of flour sometimes helps to put on your rolling pin. Don't forget you use your bench scraper. Just keep turning it so that it doesn't
Stick.
Yeah, it doesn't stick, and it kind of helps, I think, too, to have an even thickness. Once it's starting to stick, just lift it up and put a little bit more flour underneath. Try to make it as much into a circle as you can.
Yeah, and you're always going sort of from the center of
that's right.
Instead of rolling all the way across,
Yeah.
you're going to go from the center and out.
Yeah, that's right.
And that helps you get a nice circle.
What I like to do is I like to take a small cookie cutter and just kind of eyeball it and take a little thing out of the center. That way, when your pie is baking, you're always wondering, is it bubbling? Is it done in the center? Because you might have juices coming out of the edges, but if it's not done in the center, it's not done.
Yeah.
So another thing that you can do, and this
So that way, just adding the whole, you can see the juices bubbling up in the middle.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
then you know it's done.
Yeah.
A pie is not done until it looks done.
Yeah.
Because you can follow all the recipes, but if
like you said, every oven, every oven is different. So
then take a little bit of beaten egg white.
Now I've never heard of this trick before.
Yeah, this is my friend Annaliese's trick, and I thought, let's give it a whirl. She takes a little bit of egg white, beats it up, and then just puts it around the edge, and that will keep the filling from absorbing, especially when it's juicy like this. It'll keep it from absorbing into the pastry.
Create some sort of a barrier.
So now we're ready to put in.
Oh, that looks so delicious.
Our pie filling. And you want to give it a minute to even out so that it's not all juice on one side.
Yeah.
Looks like that's maybe what's happening here a little bit. Just.
So it's just underneath the height of the top of the pie.
Yeah, exactly.
Shell.
There. Okay, so now take your top shell. Again, use your bench scraper to get it up over the rolling pin. And kind of eyeball it again. And put it on top. And then I like to kind of ease it into the edges so that there's enough pastry to.
So you're just creating a bit of a
little bit of
a valley there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you're going to take your knife and you're going to, I always put my finger underneath and, kind of give myself that I know it's not technical
fingertip
explanation, but yeah.
We have now got the pie to this stage. Lovella has trimmed all the excess off the edges. She's created kind of a little valley or a little ridge around the inside there to catch some of the juices in case it overflows. Right. Yeah.
Now what I've started doing, instead of the typical way to crimp would be to roll the top crust under the bottom crust like that. And that is probably aesthetically the nicest way to do it. But I all of a sudden one day thought, why not roll the bottom crust onto the top crust, and that way, when the juices come out, they will probably stay in the pie instead of on your pie pan.
That is one of those eureka moments.
It is.
Yeah.
And you know what? Now I always do it like this.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And really, once it's all baked, who's going to see that and who's going to care?
Yeah.
I don't make the most beautiful pies, no, but
nobody's going to complain.
No. So once you've got it all turned in, then you can take it and
crimp it a little bit.
Just crimp it a little bit,
yeah,
just to make it look a little pretty.
And so we are going to bake this pie now. And do you brush it with an egg white?
Yeah, you can brush it with a little bit of egg, and sometimes I just put a little bit of sugar around the top of the crust, just to give it a little bit of crunch. And this crust is pretty soft.
And now baking time and temperature. What do you do?
I started at 400. And I'll bake it like that for about 15 minutes, and then I'll turn the oven
15.
down.
1.5, yeah.
And then I'll turn the oven down to 375 and continue baking it, and it'll be probably another hour once you turn it down.
Yeah, and how do you know when it's done? The age-old question.
The age-old question, and this is why I put this in the middle so that you can see it bubbling from the center. The crust has to be all brown. And that's what's nice about, for beginners especially, if you've got a clear pan, you can
Take a
get
look
down
at
and take a look underneath and
Yeah.
see if it's beautifully browned.
Mm-hmm.
But often what happens is the edges get too brown.
Yeah, so you want, you know it's done when it's bubbling out of the center. So there's all kinds of ways that people use to keep
Lots
the
of
edges
different
from,
tricks.
yeah. So this is like a silicone,
Yeah, it's just easy to put around the edges, and it will keep the edges from getting too brown. Or you can just use pieces of foil.
yeah.
And that helps too. And if you feel like you don't really need it, it's good to start it, because it's harder to put it on after.
Yeah.
When you all of a sudden realize, and then you're dealing with this hot pie pan. I always find it's easier to start it this way, and you can take it off at the end if you find it's just, you want it to get that perfectly even.
Yeah, okay.
And then it's ready to go.
And you have a very fancy little, I would just put it on a cookie
Thank
sheet
you.
so that if it does drip over, it doesn't drip down to the bottom of my oven. But
Yeah.
you've got something I've never seen before.
I do. I think you can probably get this at Yes Chef. It is so handy. You just put your pan on here, and anything that does drip out, it's going to drip into here. I've
Yeah.
had this for so many years. It's not perfectly clean anymore, but
Yeah.
it does the trick. I love it.
Yeah, and it still allows the heat to
It
circulate
does.
underneath. That's what the hole
exactly.
is for.
You
Yeah.
got it lifted up off of
Yeah.
the pan,
Yeah.
and that way you can still see if it's
Great.
brown underneath.
And if you don't want to bake it, you can freeze it at this point,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And then how do you bake it?
You would let it sit out, I think, a little bit, so that depending on what kind of pie pan you're using, but you start it again pretty warm, and then turn it down probably even sooner. So start it at 400 and turn it down, because it's going to take a lot longer to bake.
Yeah, so you can, it's sort of semi-frozen. From
Yeah,
semi-frozen
yeah,
you can bake it.
yeah.
And again, the way to tell if it's done again is if you can see the juices bubbling right out of the center. So that's why it's nice to
Exactly.
put a little hole in the center.
Yes.
Great. Well, Lovella, you have taught me so much about pie making and all the things that you have learned and taught yourself and take for granted. So I hope that this has taught you some new things. I know it has for me, for sure. And we want to hear about your pie successes. So send us a picture. We would love to see it. If the idea of making a conventional two-crust pie is a little intimidating for you, there is something called a galette. And a galette is made for people who don't want to go fuss with a two-crust pie. So what you do with a galette is you roll out the pie dough, and just flat, and I'm gonna let her take it away here in a second. You fill it with your fruit filling, and then you just fold in the edges. And the whole point is it's supposed to look rustic, and it's not a perfect thing. And it is a much quicker thing to do than make a double crust pie. So
Right. And you know what I would also say, it's not just for if you find a two-crust pie intimidating. I also think that they're just such a beautiful way to serve a pie. It has less crust, and it also bakes so much faster.
yeah, because you don't add as much filling because you
Yeah.
don't have the depth of the pie plate to hold in
Yeah.
the filling. So you, whereas a double crust pie we had about 7 or 8 peaches,
Yeah.
or even up to 9 if they're a little smaller. Now we've got probably 6 peaches,
Yeah.
I think that we did. So again, Lovella's just rolling out her pie. So we have a pizza pan and big flat pan, and we put some parchment paper down. We're just rolling it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. You want it as much as you can into a circle shape.
And then I will take just a,
Little crimping tool.
yeah, and I'll just take off the most ragged edges, so that you get it a little bit more symmetrical.
If you're really fussy, you can also take a big dinner plate and put it over
Ah.
top on there, and that gives you your shape to go around.
That's a good idea. Okay, so now we've got our peaches. I'm going to need half a cup of sugar.
Half a cup of
Get
sugar.
that out.
Yeah.
And I'm adding, this time I'm adding cornstarch. So I've got 2 tablespoons of cornstarch here. And again, we've got our squeezy lemon trick.
Half a cup of sugar?
Yeah.
And why cornstarch in here as opposed to flour and tapioca?
I wouldn't use tapioca in here because tapioca has a tendency to, every once in a while, you still can see the little tiny kernels.
Yeah.
So I don't like doing that. And cornstarch comes out very glossy. And so because so much of the filling is visible,
Yeah.
do that. So you just stir this up. And again, the same as last time, it's going to very quickly develop into a
So
lot
you
of
want to
juice.
do this step, but you've got to have your pie shell ready to
Yeah,
go. at that
have it
point.
ready to go. And then you can either dump them really quickly into the middle, but try to make something that looks a little bit symmetrical, so it's, you
I would
want
just
them to
dump
be,
it. I would just
yeah,
dump it.
okay, let's just dump it then. But don't dump it all with the juice to start
Right.
with. Take the peaches out just with your hands
Yeah.
and do it in a mostly flat layer.
And now you're going to
Make
leave
sure-
about an inch around the
Yeah,
outside.
a good inch is good.
Because remember, you need a little bit of pastry to fold over. And I love, there's a fantastic recipe on our website for a corn and tomato galette that I
Ooh.
always make in September for my daughter's birthday. It's her very favorite. So it's a really wonderful way to make a appetizer as well for
Oh,
a
sounds
group
amazing.
in a savory,
Yeah.
with a savory filling rather than the sweet.
And then you're just going to take it and start to pull it up over that. And you can see why we haven't poured all the juices over, right? Because
Yeah, you want to do that first.
you want to do this first. And in fact, what I do, I bake it partially first.
Oh,
I
okay.
bake it till the crust is set,
Yeah.
and then until the peaches start to look a little bit dry, and then I will take this and I'll very carefully pour it over the top and finish baking it then.
Okay.
Because you've got at least a good cup of juice there.
Yeah,
And if
so-
you can see even here already, you're having a bit of a dam break. And so and then just take a little bit of egg white again.
So bake it for about 15 minutes or so
Bake it about 15 minutes, yeah.
first.
Put on a little bit of egg white. If you've got still some of that extra pastry and you can see you're having an issue, just take that
Just
pastry and patch it up a little bit. There is no big fast rules about this. And then before I put it in the oven, I will take some almonds and I will put almonds around the edge. This is, of course, totally up to you.
Just a nice
Just
decorative.
yeah, and the flavor of almonds and peaches is
Yes,
so amazing
so good.
together.
You can probably also add a little bit of almond flavoring
Yeah,
into the filling.
absolutely. And then, just to finish it again, I take a little bit of coarse, natural sugar and put that over the edges, and it'll just give that crust such a perfect little crunch.
Beautiful.
All right, so it goes in the oven, again at 400
Yeah.
and for 15 minutes, and then take the juices from here and just pour it into the center.
And again, when the juices bubble in the middle, then
It's
you know
done.
it's done.
And then
right?
when it comes out of the oven, this is my homemade apricot jam. If you've got peach jam, of course, use that.
Yeah.
Apricot works just perfectly.
Yeah.
Just put a little bit of it on the top, just to give it a nice little
And then
glaze.
you get a really nice little glossy looking.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pop it back in the oven for a minute or two.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's it.
All right. That's a galette. Thanks so much.